Hey, hi, in this video, I'm going to show you how to handle Azure Cosmos DB interaction with using Python SDK. So as you see in this screen, this is the PPT which depicts my demo. Here, I'm going to show you how to use Azure given Python SDKs to interact with the Azure Cosmos DB account, which means that we're going to see how to create a container, how to create a database to host that container, and how to interact with that container to create the records, read the records, delete the records. Yeah. So here, before I walk you through the code and we're going to see the each properties of each current operations that we're going to do against the Cosmos DB, I'm going to tell you like how to set up the Cosmos DB account and then to get the required credentials to interact with the Cosmos DB. First one, you go to your subscription like this and go to the Azure Cosmos DB service page and click on a plus button for creating the Cosmos DB account like this. And then here you have the best suited API workloads, in the sense you can choose best one among the possible options of Azure Cosmos DB options. So here we're going to choose the Cosmos DB for NoSQL, which actually stores the records in the form of the JSON objects. So here you need to give the resource group name, something like this, and then give a random unique account name, and then use the capacity apply free tier discount. Then go to the global description, choose the required options here. And the networking, do choose your options, then go to the backup policies. So for now I'm just keeping it default since it is a demo Cosmos DB account. And then you go to the final review and create. Once the review and create goes green, so then you're going to click on create button to actually create the Azure Cosmos DB account, which will get created something like this. In my case, it is already been created. And then here we're going to go to the access keys, in the sense here we are interacting to Azure Cosmos DB account from the public, basically, right? So in that case, I'm going to use the URI plus read write accessible keys, right? So here you have the URI, which we're going to use it right now to create a Azure Cosmos DB Python client. And then we have a primary key, so you can view the primary key from something like this. So this is the primary key which I have used. All right, so basically what I'm doing is I have Azure Cosmos DB account. I have enabled the public access on that Azure Cosmos DB account. I'm using the URI and the read write key options, that is primary key, to interact with the from the Azure Python SDKs. Okay, so in that case, I will just go to the next option, that is to Data Explorer, which is basically helps us to view or view the data present in this Cosmos DB of NoSQL options. Okay, if I go to the data, currently I don't have any databases. So it's just like another SQL, the server, right? So you have a SQL server. In that one, you're going to create a database. Within the database, you're going to create a table. So here the pattern follows same, but this is we generally called as a NoSQL because there is no key value, there is no column and rows here. So here you will have an object in the form of hash or in the form of dictionary in the Python, the variable terminologies, right? So here we need to have a database, and then we need to create a container, and then you can start interacting with that container to create the records. Okay, so how to do that with using Azure Python SDK, that is the main aim of this demo, right? So without any delay, I'm going to take you to the the Cosmos DB underscore cred.py file, which is a Python file. So here I'm not taking any kind of authentication to Azure subscription where I have created the Azure Cosmos DB, but I'm just using the script from my laptop, which is actually an internet, and try to connect with the Azure Cosmos DB, right? So with this option, I'm going to just quickly walk you through the here. So we are actually importing a couple of things here, which we're going to use it down the line. That is, basically we have the import OS, which is I am not used, but I'm just imported it. Yeah, and then likewise we have the from Azure Cosmos Azure.cosmos, right? Python library, or basically the Azure Python SDK. From there we are importing the the Cosmos client exception and partition keys, basically. Yeah? And along with that, I'm also using azure.cosmos.aio, which is nothing but asynchronous IO. And from that we are actually importing the Cosmos client. In the sense here, you can interact with the Azure Cosmos DB client with using two methods. One is synchronous, the other one is asynchronous. So synchronous means that you are actually hitting the APIs of the Cosmos DB account one after the other. In the sense, once you hit the API to get the records, then you need to wait until that get operation gets completed. In the sense, the second the invocation of the API happens one after the other. But in asynchronous, the API invocation can happen parallelly. That is the difference between the sync and async API operations. I'm going to show you both as well in this demo, right? For now, let's look at the async for the synchronous API invocation. That's the reason I have activated this module import, that is Azure Cosmos DB, while I have commented out azure.cosmos.aio import cosmos db client, and then we are actually importing the async library, because I need that, because we are dealing with the cosmos db python sdk which uses async methods. Yeah, and with that note, so I was actually telling you that from the keys, so from the keys you need to have the URI, and so this is the URI which I copied, and this is the primary key which I copied and kept it as a variable. But since this is a demo, that's the reason I have showing this key. No worries, I'm going to delete these keys afterwards. But in the production, you might need to store these keys in a Python, maybe Azure Key Vault, or you're going to store it as an environmental variable, or you can store it as in a secure place and try to retrieve from there and try to use it. Right. So this is a demo. That's the reason I'm just showing you as a recorded, in the sense hard-coded variable. But that is not a standard practices in the production grade. So then we're going to create a client for Cosmos DB with using the Cosmos client with a parameter like URL. This is the URL, and this is the credentials acting as a key. So basically this is a basic authentication based client creation. So we have a client, and then I'm just creating a database name called to-do list database, and then we have a database. Basically we are actually creating a database object out of it, that is client get database client, and right, and then you have the container name. So this is the container name. Yeah, and this is the database name. So basically before you before you get a database, before you get a container, you should have those objects already there, right? So for that case, for now what I do is I'm going to comment out these two options, because till now I don't have any database created. So first let's create a database, let's create a container, then I'm going to activate that. Yeah, so basically this is a programming, how this is how the programming works basically, and I'm going very fast to cover up the everything within a certain limited time. So let's create a database now. So for that case, what I'm doing is I'm using the Cosmos DB client here, and then here we are actually invoking an API called create_database, where we are passing the value equal to to-do list, and then we are actually putting that underneath the try except block. Okay, so with that option, what I do is I'm going to execute this file. In the sense, every time I do want to execute this Python file, I'm going to use the native capability of VS Code, that is run Python file. So I'm going to hit on this one. So basically it should create a database. So that's, it looks like that it has created. You see that there were no error, and it has passed into the next iteration. So if we go to the data explorer and try to see the the databases, we should see a database name called to-do list. Here you go. So earlier there were no database when I showed you, but now we have a database with an empty collection. In the sense, it does not has any collections. Now let's create a collection as well. So currently it is loading because it does not has, that's the reason it was not able to load it. But now let's go to the next option, that is create a container. Right, so what I do is, for this case, I'm gonna comment out this option, that is above option, that is I'm gonna comment out the create database, but uncomment the uncomment the the create container. Okay, so for this case, now I need to activate the database. Now try to understand that right now we have a database created. Now we're going to use that database object and try to create a container within it, and for that case I have activated a database object. So how I'm creating a database object is using the client.get database client. I'm passing the database name, right, which actually creates a database object here. So here then you're going to go to the next try catch block, which actually means for create container. So here you are actually using the object dot create_container and passing the value. So make sure that you define this container very correctly. In the sense, you need to double check, triple check, and try to create a container correctly, or else you're going to hit a problem in the down the line. So here we are giving the container name, and in the partition key I'm just making the partition key equal to ID. In the sense, whenever I create an object, whenever I create a record underneath this container, there will be a mandatory key called ID, and that is key adding as a partition key of the records. Yeah, and then the kind is hash. In the sense, it's just an hash table, or you can consider it as an dictionary, like that it is. Yeah, and then it actually does does the exception block. So if it is throwing an exception, it thinks that the container is already there, and then we are actually creating a container object here as well. Right, so with that option, what I do is I'm going to click on this to create a container called items underneath the to-do list database. So I'm going to click on this one. Basically it says that there is an error, syntactical error. Basically it says there is some syntactical error. So if I can show you, yeah, because I have enabled the multiple codes, that's the reason it is throwing the error. I'm going to comment out the another API action. In the sense, basically small block of this code is helping me to present you one API and explain one API. How does this API works? Okay. So for that case, there was another API invocation called, the create analytical store enabled container, which is next option. That's the reason it was throwing the error. Now I'm gonna rerun this code. It should create, basically it should create the container for me. So I'm gonna clear it again. See, I'm showing you to create a container now underneath the database. So I'm going to click on create this one. So which actually creates a container now with a partition key equal to ID. So now you try to refresh it. So we should see, basically we should see that, the container being created called items. And if you go to the settings, so click on settings. So you should see that, the partition key equal to ID now, right? So now with that option, basically, we had a database called to-do list. Then underneath that to-do list, basically we have created, the container called, basically, container with a name like items. In the sense, you have a database, then you have a container, right? So with that, we are done with the second API action, that is to create a container. Now let's go to the next option, that is how to create an analytical store enabled container, which is a different types of container though. So I'm going to comment out this option. So like this, I'm going to comment out that and try to just activate only this part. Yeah. So here what it is, I'm going to create another container with a name like something different name, right? So for that case, what I do is I'm gonna activate. I'm gonna create another container with the name like items1. So what we are doing is we are actually creating another container with the name items1, but in this case the properties of this container are going to be different. In the sense, you see that it has a partition key with this definition, and then it also has a default TTL equal to -1, which was not there in this case. Yeah. So remember that we are actually invoking the create underscore container, passing the container name, partition key in this format, whereas as I explained, so this is the ID which is actually acting as a partition key. Now let's see whether we're going to create this analytical store enabled container within the basically within the the Cosmos DB database. So I'm just going to create that. I just hit it enter, and if I refresh it, we should have the another container called this is the container which is basically same, but it has a different properties. Now what we do is we're gonna stick to the items1 container, and we try to do a CRUD operation on this container. Yeah. So with that option, what I do is I'm going to go to the next API action. So before I go to the next API action, as I said, we need to enable the container object, because we are actually invoking an API against the Cosmos DB account container object, right? So we are creating a container object with using database.get underscore container underscore client, and we are passing the container name here. Right. So with that option, let's go to the next option, that is to create a records within the containers. So how to do that? So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to comment out the above options and try to uncomment only the create record item. So basically, so in the you see that we have a block called create record. So this is like I'm using the for loop. For loop actually is a Python code which actually runs the the commands one after the other in a synchronous manner. Okay. And we are actually using the the Cosmos DB client in the synchronous mode, not in asynchronous mode. Asynchronous mode would be demoed in the last line, in the last part of this demo. So stay tuned. Basically, let's say, so how to create the records into the into the basically into the container. So for this case, we have a for loop that is actually runs this for loop for 10 times, from basically 9 times from 1 to 10. In the sense, it will count from 1 to 9, right? And then try to invoke the API called underneath the container object. It's actually invoking an API called upsert item. Basically, it creates an item in the form of a dictionary. Basically, it is acting as a JSON object in a very layman term. So here we are the dictionary has a key value page like ID equal to items. Then we have a partition key. Let me call it as not a partition key. Let me call it as just a P key. Yeah. Just key. Then we have a product. Then we have a product model. So basically, think that you are creating a record into the Cosmos DB for your application purpose, which will has the say like T keys, TY keys, then product name. So whatever you think. So basically, I'm just creating these records for your information. Yeah. All right. So here what we do is we're gonna create these records now. Let's see how we can create these records. Now what I do is to run this upsert item APIs for 10 times and create the 10 records. I'm just gonna click on this, that is run this script. In the sense, every time I'm clicking in this run button, it actually running this script. Okay, so something similar you can follow it to do the automation with using Azure functions, with using the AWS Lambda. Though you can use it the Google Cloud run as well, or you can use it any any application side. basically this is I'm running this Python, which is nothing but acting as an application running from the Windows 11 laptop, or this can be a Windows 22 server or Windows 23 server basically. Yeah. So here we have created a records. Let's go to the collection called items and try to see if we have 10 items now. So if I refresh it, here you go. So we have the record. So so basically it is currently loading. I need to refresh it bit. Looks like it got created in items one, if I'm not wrong, because so here you go. It has created in under item one because we have enabled the container name equal to items one. So the records would be created under items one. Okay. So if I can refresh it now and go to the items, right? So of this one. So here you go, right? So our 10 records are being created, in the sense 9 records are being created like this. Yeah. You see that the records are being created under items one collection or container underneath the to-do list database. Now let's go to the next API action. That is, what is our next API action? That is how to delete a record from the container. Yeah. So for that case, what I do is I'm gonna go to the I'm gonna delete the create record. So basically, I'm gonna comment out the create record and enable the delete data records. In the sense, in this one, what we are doing is basically here we are actually running another for loop where we are actually querying with using the container object. We are querying the container with the query called select star from the product dot p, where product model equal to model 2, and cross partition query is enabled. And then we are actually iterating through the number of objects being returned by that query, and then on that each object we are actually invoking a delete underscore item API, and then we are passing the item. In the sense, we are actually passing that output of that query, and then in that one we are actually mentioning that hey, the partition key has to be like this, then only you need to delete it. Yeah. So here we need to delete the model to the underneath the collection, underneath the container we have the lots of records. In that record we need to delete a record where the model name product model equal to model 2, which means that we need to delete the item 2, right? So item 2 has the model 2 product model, so that has to be deleted. Let's see if it deletes for us. Okay, so I'm going to run this script now. So I'm just going to click hit. Looks like it has deleted. You see that first it is printing and it has printed, and then it run the delete item. Now if I refresh it, we should see item 2 getting disappeared, right? So you see that the item 2 is disappeared, which means that we were able to delete the records as well. Now let's go to the next option, that is how to query the database. In the sense, next to do the read operation. Okay, so for that case I'm gonna uncomment the query database API actions like this. Now we see that how to query a container now, right? So for that case, again I'm using the for loop. This is basically we're actually using the synchronous mode, right? That's the reason I'm using the for loop. And then the query is this is very simple. It's not a big complicated query. I will just show you in a very neat manner like this. So basically, so it is a for loop. In that one we are actually running dynamic query called query underscore item underneath the container. So we have a container object invoking a API called query underscore item, and in that one parameter is query contains the select basically the where item equal to item 3, and then basically it's enable the cross partition key equal to true, and then we are actually printing. In the sense, we are actually giving the output in the form of a JSON object. Let's see if we are able to retrieve this particular record from the container underneath the particular table. So let's see if I run this one. So remember that whenever I'm showing you each part of the code, basically it also contains everything. In the sense, we are actually executing import OS, import this, importing JSON, right? So then we are actually having the key value client, database object when we have a container name, and the container objects are being invoked or ran every time I run this piece of code. Okay, so don't get confused. To just explicitly explain about the 1.1 API query, I'm showing you in this format. Now let's see if I can retrieve the records of where ID equal to item 3. Here you go, right? So I was able to retrieve the records where ID equal to item 3 with using this option, that is with using the synchronous, right? So now let's go a bit ahead and try to run the model. In the sense, try to run the Cosmos DB client in the form of asynchronous mode. Asynchronous mode is basically a highly recommended one, because that will actually increase the speed, because you are actually invoking the API against your Cosmos DB account in the form of parallel. In the sense, parallel execution will be enabled when you use Cosmos DB asynchronous mode. Okay, so for asynchronous mode, you need to import the another module, that is Cosmos DB AIO, and then from that you need to invoke the Cosmos DB client. Then only you will be able to run the asynchronous API of the Cosmos DB as well, right? So for now, what I do is I'm going to activate that asynchronous mode by uncommenting the asynchronous piece of code. So I have written an asynchronous piece of code which actually creates records. In the sense, it actually creates 20 records now. All right, so with using the asynchronous mode. Okay, let's see how does it creates and how fast it gets created. Okay, so for that case, we have a function in the form of asynchronous definition. You see that we are using async library. If I go ahead, we are using async.io, and then we have the basically, in the sense, whenever you use cosmosdb.io, you must import async.io Python library as well. And that's the reason we are able to define a function with the async, right? And the function name is create products, and in that one we are actually defining a client with the async. Basically, whenever you use asynchronous, so you must define basically you need to follow this syntax, that is async with means what it happens is it actually enables the client and also closes the client. In the sense, it opens the client connection, it also closes the client connections dynamically, right? And that's the reason we need to use async with Cosmos client, and where the Cosmos client is being activated with using URL and the credentials passed as a key, and each object is acting as a client. And within this client, we are actually using the dynamically we are actually creating object of database, object of container, and then for on that particular objects, that is database and container, we're actually running the for loop, which will run in an asynchronous mode. In the sense, all 20 times it will run in a parallel, right? So here we are actually invoking an API called container upsert item, and then we are actually inserting the records like this. In the sense, now our records gets overwritten and it will try to create in this format. Okay, let's see if it creates. Right, that is about the function definition. So how are we invoking that asynchronous function is something like this. That is, we're actually again defining the main function, the asynchronous main function, and from that we are actually invoking the create product function as a with the await option, right? And then we here you said that every event loop to execute the asynchronous function. In the sense, to execute the asynchronous function, we have to use async model that I have shown you in the above, and in that one we are actually invoking the main function. So this main function is indirectly invoking this the create products. Yeah. Now with that option being explained, so let me run this query which actually does creates the products for 20 times. So you see that how much speed it is actually doing. So right now it is running, and here you go, it has created within 1 second. That is, it was able to insert the records of 20 within basically 1 second. So okay, if I refresh it, here you go, so we have a 20 records right now. So as I said you earlier, so basically we have nearby 20 records now, and the item to which we deleted earlier, now it got changed. You see that it does not has any key values, but it has a item, product, model, and so in the sense, like this format, we have nearby 20 records are been inserted in this container called items one. Yeah, so this is how we actually use Azure Cosmos DB clients. This is how we use Azure Cosmos DB client to invoke the asynchronous operations or asynchronous APIs. Yeah. Right, so let's go to the next option, that is how to query it. In the sense, how do I do the read operations on the asynchronous mode? Okay, so for that case, it is very simple. I'm going to comment out the other options and try to uncomment the last option, that is how to read the operation. In the sense, how to query the the Cosmos DB container with using asynchronous option. Basically, we define the function in the same pattern. How did we define for the the create operation? So here we are using the query items, which actually queries the the container. So here we have a function called asynchronous definition create list, in the sense which basically queries the table. My function is like create underscore list. In the sense, it just creates a list, and then we have a result. In the sense, here we are actually using the API called objects called container. Underneath that, we are actually querying the items of the containers. That is, this is the query model. So basically, this is the query I'm running it against in the Python. Then we have an item list, which is a created dynamic list, and in that dynamic list, we are actually using the asynchronous for loop and try to collect the items being being returned, and then item C is being returned. You see that here, since I'm not using with, if I compare this above one, if I compare the above one, that is asynchronous with, which actually opens and closes the client dynamically. Here I'm not using the with. That's the reason I have to explicitly close the client as well. Yeah, because this is asynchronous mode. Yeah. All right, so with that option, then we have the default function, that is main function, which actually invokes this create underscore list function, and then the items returned from that list is being collected and being printed here, right? and then finally we are actually closing it off. All right, so with that option, let me run this piece of code and check whether it does returns the queries and returns the object. Here you go. This was very fast actually. So it has returned that returned an object underneath a container called items2, where the product model equal to model2. In the sense, if I go to the model2, so we have a model2, and whatever this object, whatever I'm selecting here, is been returned from my laptop, right? All right, so with that option, I have shown you the everything that I need to show on the Cosmos DB account, where we are actually interacting with the Cosmos DB account with using the the Azure given Python SDK. With using the Python SDKs, we were able to interact with the Azure Cosmos DB account and try to do a CRUD operations on that the database containers, right? All right, so with that note, I have shown you the things need to be shown in this video. Finally, I can request please do subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. With that note, thank you, thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.